Welcome to Lesson 2. This is a brief lecture on the history of art. In this lesson, I will first briefly discuss some important points about history, and then it will be followed by the periods in Western art history. Okay, before I proceed to the discussion of art history, allow me to discuss first history. In relation to my previous lecture, where I mentioned how the definitions and assumptions of the term art has always changed, I hope that you are also aware that just like the term art, the definition and the ideas about history have also changed over time. Written history is only factual and straightforward theoretically, but in truth, the past is vast, it is fragmented and messy. Therefore, in the past, there have been decisions by historians to exclude and to include parts of this past. They did that in order to come up with an organized and linear narrative or material that would effectively narrate the past for the benefit of the present. Of course, time is changing. Therefore, these narratives are updated, rewritten, and sometimes discarded altogether and replaced with new ones. We can therefore say that history is subjective. Okay, it is subjective because it is a product of time. It is a product of place and the people when it was written based on their interpretation of the past. Okay, this idea about history is expressed in many famous lines, just like that of Napoleon Bonaparte, in which he says, "What is history but a fable agreed upon?" The discipline of art history developed in Europe during the colonial period, roughly from the 15th to the mid-20th century. Early art historians actually emphasize the European tradition. It celebrated its Greek and Roman origins and the ideals of academic art. By the mid-20th century, a standard narrative for Western art or art history was established that it traced development from the prehistoric, ancient, and medieval Mediterranean to modern Europe and the United States. Art from the rest of the world in this early discipline was labeled non-Western art, and it was typically treated only marginally and from a colonial or colonialist perspective. However, in the 20th century, an immense sociocultural change took place. And because of that, art historians began amending narratives and they started including artists of color and also women artists. Moreover, the traditional focus on painting, sculpture, and architecture was expanded to include so-called minor arts such as ceramics, textiles, and contemporary media such as video and performance art. Interest in non-Western art also increased. Today, the biggest social development or challenge facing art history is globalism. As our world becomes increasingly interconnected, familiarity with different cultures and facility with diversity are essential. Art history has this role to play in developing these skills. Now, art historians ponder and debate how to reconcile the discipline's European intellectual origins and its problematic colonialist legacy with the contemporary multiculturalism and how to write art history in a global era. In order to somehow show the progression of Western art history, a timeline is often provided to organize the isms or the art movements in order to tell the grand story of art development. Art historian Christopher Jones one of the sources I used in creating this lecture, presents in his book a list of these art movements. These movements are presented and briefly characterized on the slides that will follow. But before we proceed to the different periods, let me first help you recall how to read some of the important abbreviations used in our Gregorian calendar, since you will be encountering them in the discussion of the art periods. Our calendar is called the Gregorian or Christian calendar, and it was instituted by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582. Take note that there are numerous calendars aside from the Gregorian calendar. There are other calendars out there that are still in use today. I assume that you also know how to read a date using our calendar. For example, if today is December 26, 2021 or 2021, it is therefore understood that 2021 years, give or take a few, after Jesus Christ is believed to have been born. Okay, it has been 2021 years, give or take a few, since Jesus Christ is believed to have been born. However, if Jesus used a calendar during his time, it would definitely not be the one we are using today. Many people use the abbreviations BC and AD with a year, for example, AD 2012 or AD 2021. BC refers to before Christ, and the initials AD stand for the Latin Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord. This system was devised by a monk in the year 525. A more recent system uses the abbreviations BCE, which stands for Before the Common Era, and CE for Common Era. BCE functions just like BC. CE may replace AD. This newer system is now widely used as a way of expressing the same periods as BC and AD, but it doesn't have a Christian reference, okay? According to this system, we count time backwards before the Common Era and forwards in the Common Era. The abbreviation AD is written before the year. So example, AD 2021. We are in the year of our Lord 2021. The abbreviation BC is placed after the year. BCE and CE, just like BC, are both written after the year as well. Often, dates will be preceded with C or a CA. These are abbreviations of the Latin word circa, which means around or approximately. We use this before a date to indicate that we do not know exactly when something happened. So for example, C 400 BCE means approximately 400 years before the Common Era. Today, we live in the 21st century. A century is composed of 100 years. There is no year zero in the Gregorian calendar. Years 1 to 100 is the first century. The 21st century is from January 1, 2001, and it will conclude on December 31, 2000. The century is always one more than the written year. Similarly, when we say 2nd century BCE, so we do it backwards, okay, no year zero, so we are referring to the years 200 to 101 BCE. Okay, at this point, we will now move on to the discussion of the artistic styles in the different periods of art history. Bear in mind that when I say art history, we are referring to the movements based on the agreed upon linear narrative framework created by historians who looked at progressive art exclusively in the view or in the eyes of the Western world. Here is a complete list of the art movements. Take note that some of these periods or movements overlap with each other. Medieval art is from around AD 4 to AD 1300, and it is a broad category that includes many artistic styles and periods, including the early Christian and Byzantine, Anglo-Saxon and Viking, Carolingian, Ottonian, Romanesque, and Gothic. During the medieval period, the various secular arts were unified by the Christian Church and the sacred arts associated with it. The common themes and subjects are church and sacred stories and personalities. And the purpose was to create arts to promote and spread Christianity. Approximately covering the years AD 1300 to 1600, the Renaissance period saw a blossoming of all the arts in painting, sculpture, music, and architecture. From Italy to the Netherlands, the Renaissance combined a revival of classic learning from ancient Greece and Rome with an increased awareness of nature and a more individualistic view of man. The incorporation of general elements of design such as line, color, shape, texture, and space and depth can also be seen in the art of this period. During this time, anybody who is considered a specialist in a particular field is also called an artist. It was also the time of the rise of the academies. Art during this period became an industry. Okay, some of the key artists of this period are Sandro Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. Okay, this is an example of an artwork during the Renaissance period. We have the Birth of Venus, painted by Botticelli, approximately around 1485. Following the Renaissance, the dominant style of art took a more ornate and often extravagant turn. Covering the years between around 1600 to 1730, art and architecture combined the classical idealism of the Renaissance with a greater emphasis on drama, with artists seeking to evoke emotional states, using strong color schemes and employing swirling spirals and upward diagonals. The art also during this period was heavily sponsored by the Catholic Church because it's related to the Counter-Reformation movement. So what happened during this period? The Catholic Church commissioned artists to create art in order for the Catholic Church to be revived. Okay, the Counter-Reformation Act is also the Catholic revival in the history of Christianity. So the Roman Catholic Church directed some artists to create artworks in order to promote the religion. Okay, it's in response to the Reformation, which was led by Martin Luther and John Calvin. So they were great critics of the practices and the theology of the Roman Catholic Church. So in order to respond to that criticism, the Catholic Church commissioned artists to create artworks that reinforced the Catholic Church. Okay, and these artworks were ornate, dramatic, and with swirling spirals and upward diagonals. They were dramatic. So key artists included Caravaggio, Rubens, Bernini, Velázquez. So we have here an example of an artwork by Rubens. The title is Lot and His Daughters in 1614. Approximately from 1720 to 1780, the Rococo was in many ways an extension of the Baroque. It pushed the decorative and theatrical aspects of art with an emphasis on asymmetry, curved forms, and bright colors. It originated in France during the reign of King Louis XV from 1715 to 1774. It is especially characterized by the combination of decorative painting, sculpture, and architecture, applying to both interior design and the decorative arts. Key artists included the three Giovanni Battista Tiepolo, François Boucher, Jean Honoré Fragonard. So here we have here an example painting by François Boucher entitled Venus and Amour in the year 1742. Neoclassicism was a return to order. It's believed to be from around 1750 to 1830, and it followed the ornamental extravagances of the Baroque and Rococo periods. So during this period, artists and architects revived the symmetry and the precision of the Renaissance era, which drew inspiration from the Greco-Roman periods. Okay, so for architecture, columns and pediments were widespread, while in the fine arts, the elements of styles were used once again for paintings, and artworks had a strong sense of inner harmony, clarity, and restraint within the picture. Art during this period was also a political tool to reveal the stories of the rich and the influential. We have here an example painting by a key artist during this period, Jacques Louis David or David. He painted the Emperor Napoleon in 1812. Romanticism is from around 1780 to 1880, and it is the beginning of modern art. Romanticism is an important style in the modern history of art because it is seen as an expression of the individual artist and an authentic response to the world the artist experiences. During this period, an artist is believed to be someone who responds to the world of his or her experiences, especially its vastness and unpredictability. Imagination, passion, and emotion are prioritized over intellect and reason. There were also artists and authors who explored the dark recesses of human psychology during this period. Here is an example of an artwork by one of the key artists, Caspar David Friedrich. The title of his work is The Hiker Above the Sea of Fog, and it's believed to have been painted in 1817. The next art movement or period is Realism, and it is believed to be by some as the first modern art movement. It began in France in the 1840s, and it's caused by multiple events such as the anti-romantic movement in Germany, the rise of journalism, and the advent of photography. These events inspired the new interest in accurately capturing everyday life. This attention to accuracy is evident in the art produced during this period. The art during this period featured detailed, lifelike depictions of usually working class and peasants. One of the most influential leaders of the realist movement is Gustave Courbet. He was a French artist committed to painting only what he could physically see. He is also known as the father of realism. In the photo is The Desperate Man, one of his paintings. It's believed to have been painted around 1843 to 1845. The eighth art period is Art Nouveau, and it's approximately from 1890 to 1910. Art Nouveau, which translates to New Art, attempted to create an entirely authentic and new movement free from any imitation of the styles that it followed. This movement heavily influenced applied arts, graphics, and illustration. This style focused on the natural world, characterized by long, curvy lines and sometimes fairy wings. Influential Art Nouveau artists worked in a variety of media, including architecture, graphic and interior design, jewelry making, and even painting. Czechoslovakian graphic designer Alphonse Mucha is best known for his theatrical posters of French actress Sarah Bernard. So we have here an example of his artwork depicting Sarah Bernard. This was created approximately in 1896. The next artistic movement or period is Impressionism, and it is perhaps the most well-known of all the artistic styles. It emerged in the second half of the 19th century in Paris. The style is anti-academic, so if we're going to compare it to the Greco-Roman style, they actually differ. The artworks, especially the paintings during this period, are characterized by light, lively brushstrokes, and bright colors. Artists also took painting outdoors en plein air instead of creating paintings in studios. Many Impressionist subjects were landscapes and scenes of everyday life, and they placed attention on the transient effects of sunlight as much as on the subjects themselves. Claude Monet, a French artist who spearheaded the idea of expressing one's perceptions before nature, is virtually synonymous with the Impressionist movement. His notable work, Impression Sunrise, which was painted in 1872, is actually the inspiration behind the name of the movement. Post-impressionism is mainly a French art movement that developed roughly between 1886 and 1905. It is believed to be a natural evolution from Impressionism. Artists during this period used vivid colors, thick brushstrokes instead of thin ones, and real-life subject matter. But they also expressed their emotional and psychological responses to the world through distorted forms and unnatural color schemes. The term post-impressionism was coined in 1910 by the English art critic Roger Fry, and the term post-impressionism does not refer to a close-knit group of artists, but instead to an array of separate artists who were inspired by the Impressionists in their own ways. Key artists included Georges Seurat, noted for his his pointillism technique, which used small, distinct dots to form an image. Vincent van Gogh is also considered a post-impressionist painter. His style is through the expression of his emotions through rugged brushstrokes and dark tones. Fauvism developed from around 1900 to 1935. It was led by Henri Matisse. It was also a movement built upon by the examples from Vincent van Gogh and Georges Seurat. The movement was characterized by expressive use of intense color, line, and brushwork, a bold sense of surface design, and flat composition. As seen in many of the works by Matisse himself, the separation of color from its descriptive, representational purpose was one of the core elements that shaped this movement. The movement is centered on the expression of feelings. Fauvism was an important precursor of Cubism and Expressionism. Expressionism is the movement that followed Fauvism, and it originated in Germany at the beginning of the 20th century. Artists during this period responded to the rapidly changing world by creating artworks which contained non-objective reality. The artworks are also emotionally charged and subjective, and they are furthermore characterized by bold, brisk lines, which are also oftentimes roughly cut. There are also disfigurations, vivid and sometimes overly bright colors. These paintings or artworks are expressing anxieties and raw emotions. Expressionist painters also revisited native folk traditions and tribal arts for their inspiration. The roots of Expressionism can be traced to Vincent van Gogh and Edward Munch. So we can see here an example of an Expressionist painting. So we can clearly see roughly cut lines, distorted colors, disfiguration, non-objective subject. It may be considered as emotionally charged. Okay, and the title is Landscape with Factory Chimney, obviously a response to a rapidly changing world. Okay, industrialization. This painting, by the way, is by Kandinsky, painted in 1910. Cubism is the next art movement, and it was a highly influential art style that was invented in around 1907 to 1908 by artists Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque. Taking inspiration from the post-impressionist Paul Cézanne, the artists during this period began painting subjects in fragmented forms in such a way that suggested multiple viewpoints or multiple points of view simultaneously. Cubists also reject the concept that art should copy nature. The characteristics of Cubism are intersecting planes of light and overlapping forms, showing an object from several sides, and from above and below, breaking conventional ideas about visual perception. We have here an example of a painting by Pablo Picasso. It's a portrait. It doesn't even look like an actual person. So it shows the different sides or the several sides of the subject of the painting. Surrealism is the next art movement or period. It emerged from the Dada art movement in 1916. Dada artworks were anti-aesthetic, anti-rational, and anti-idealistic. Therefore, surrealists created works of art that defied reason. Surrealists blamed events like the World War I because they believed that events such as World War I repress imaginative thoughts. Surrealists were influenced by Karl Marx and theories developed by Sigmund Freud, who explored psychoanalysis and the power of imagination. That is why paintings under this movement typically are about vivid and bizarre dreams with historical accuracy. Surrealism, in short, is dreamlike. Influential surrealist artists like Salvador Dali tapped into the unconscious mind to depict revelations found on the street and in everyday life. Dali's paintings, in particular, pair vivid and bizarre dreams with historical accuracy. Abstract Expressionism emerged from around 1940s to 1950s, and it is shaped by the legacy of Surrealism. Abstract Expressionism emerged in New York after the Second World War. It is often referred to as the New York School of Action Painting. The painters under this movement broke away from what was considered conventional, and instead they used spontaneity and improvisation to create weird and abstract works of art, such as colossally scaled works or big works whose size could no longer be placed in an easel. They also made use of floors or streets instead of canvases. Abstract Expressionism focuses on the medium instead of the subject. So there is no subject in an abstract expressionism artwork. There's no person, there's no place, there is no object depicted in the artwork. It also makes no attempt to capture the reality of the physical world. Celebrated artists, abstract expressionist painters include Jackson Pollock, known for his unique style of drip painting. What you see in the photo is an example of his artwork. The title is Autumn Rhythm, created in 1950. Another abstract expressionist painter is Mark Rothko, whose paintings employed large blocks of color to convey a sense of spirituality. Contemporary art is the term used for all the art that has come after the Second World War. In some sources, it begins in 1970. So this kind of art encompasses many themes and styles, and it takes us up to the present day. It is actually very impossible to sum up contemporary art in just a few lines, okay? Because it is the kind of art that breaks the rules, okay? It is the kind of art wherein there is a mixture of ideas, medias, and forms. It has no linear pattern and it is chaotic. It is still in development. Okay, examples of contemporary or modern artistic styles are feminist art, street art, digital art. We are currently witnessing the progression of this kind of art. If you want to read more about the points mentioned in this lecture, you may visit these websites. This is the end of the lecture. Thank you for listening.